Beans and Bakery was a long cafe in New York City's Upper West Side. It was well liked, a popular lunch spot serving sandwiches and salads that you could take out or sit down with at one of the many tables or in the back where a few soiled couches were spread around. The coffee was decent and the baked goods were especially rich. Ernest, a big motherfucker, and his wife owned the cafe. Ernie, was grotesque. He had a wild gray mane and a prominent bald spot scarred by blisters at which he picked viciously during the summer. His skin was flaky, his mustache uneven, his shirts were coffee-stained, his light cotton pants grossly tight across his thick thighs, and always displaying a large group of keys that hung from a belt loop near his crotch, ever jangling against a thick bundle that he often adjusted. His wife, Adeline, was a petite brunette with at least 2 inches of gray roots always exposed. She wore cheap dresses with flower prints and the same filthy pair of espadrilles throughout most of the year. She was unattractive too and appeared older than her 47 years, but so gentle and truly an inspired baker. I had been employed with them as full-time night manager. I was dutiful, always staying on alone very late just to finish up the books or to throw out the poisoned rats that had expired in bags of flour or cornmeal in the basement. But often, that late, I just explored, finding things of interest other than rats. Many nights, when I had stayed up too late looking about, I would just fall asleep exhausted on the filthy couches in the back of the cafe, where legions of mice were already likewise engaged. Now, since childhood, I've enjoyed exploring other people's environs. I love to rifle through desks, closets, drawers, and boxes. I am especially adept at finding precisely what people have tried to hide. There was no spot in my childhood home that I had left unturned. I knew where the booze was, the gun was, and where those photos of a decidedly unfamily photo album nature were. Locked cabinets were no impediment, nor were paltry wooden boxes that required little more than a safety pin to jimmy. If you are an explorer with an natural talent and an ardent curiosity, then you will find keys, which are so often attached to a person's keychain or kept in those paltry wooden boxes. Never in my explorations did I feel a sneak. On the contrary, I felt closer to my family. And as with my ex-employers, I felt closer to sweet, gentle Adeline. And the more I discovered about Ernie, the more I felt I needed to protect her from what her offensive, ineffectual husband was planning. Of those employed at the Bean and Bakery Cafe were Julie, the nice Columbia graduate who was the night manager, Jose was the food prep and sandwich maker, Jim made salads into deliveries, and Sarah, Anna, Nikki, all college undergrads, like myself at the time, worked no more than 24 hours and were constantly replaced by others like them with names like them. By 10 p.m. all had left, but for the dishwasher, John, a young Sudanese man with minimal English but a ready laugh and smile. Despite work being done, he always offered to stay with me at closing so that I would not be left alone. Ernie and Adeline were in and out, but their schedules were relatively predictable, both leaving no later than 6 p.m. each day. Catherine was the baker, and I loathed her. She was a little older than Adeline and had a large, red-cheeked face and small, uninteresting brown eyes. She baked Adeline's recipes, always adding upon some person's praise that she had actually strayed from Adeline's formula and added some spice or extra vanilla. Catherine began baking about 4 a.m. and would often stay in the cafe until the afternoon just watching and drinking coffee. It was around 11 p.m. that I usually began my exploring in the cafe. The basement was where we kept all the food, where I walked around extracting rat carcasses, and also where I did the books, which were never on. Usually the door would be off by $200 at least, once it was near $500. It was Ernie who took this money out, and he called every night at 10:30 p.m. to learn what the numbers had been that day. And each night I would tell him how the register was off, and I could find no reason for it. Always his reply was that the unaccounted for money had been paid out to the bread delivery guy, or he had paid John in cash that day, or he had bought new equipment for the cafe, none of which was true. I knew he was secreting it somewhere, but while I was invested in finding the spot where I knew a mass of money was hidden, it was for no other reason than my own sense of accomplishment. I had no other aim until one of those rare nights when I had fallen asleep on one of those plagued couches. I was awoken by a noise in the kitchen, but it wasn't a blender I heard or the clang of bread pans, it was a squealing. The big red-faced baker was squealing, and then another voice, Ernie's quivering voice, sputtering out phrases I don't care to repeat. It was terrible. I was so sick at heart. I thought of Adeline, of how her tragic wrinkled face looked each time Catherine stole her baking thunder. To imagine those two, they were in the dishwashing room some ways away from me. I was certain they hadn't seen me, as it was dark in the back and I was just a small bundle, concealed by a throw that moved from couch to couch throughout the day. I was so embarrassed to have not guessed at the affair. But I had never found any evidence of it, never a food-stained, telltale receipt on Ernie's desk, and there was a naked picture of Adeline, not Catherine, in his locked desk drawer. The gross cacophony of sounds coming from the dishwashing room did not last long. Soon, Catherine was clanking around pans and asking Ernie to bring up some flour for her, chatting, laughing, and then the plan slithered out, a conversation that seemed routine, a post-coital exchange that revealed to what purpose Ernie had been siphoning money daily. Ireland. Catherine's red face had been born in Ireland, though she hadn't been back since she was a child. Somebody died, and it was their plan, Catherine and Ernie's, to flee to some property there that had been bequeathed to the loathsome baker. I shook with rage. And what of Adeline? I was even more determined to find where Ernie was keeping the money. 3 weeks later, with a flashlight, atop of so many crushed, coffee-stained paper cups and rat droppings, I spied a metal box bolted underneath Ernie's desk. The safe's insignia read Ultra Last. I shuffled out from under the desk. Those cups were everywhere, all over the desk, too. He was always drinking coffee. Coffee, I discovered very early on, that was spiked by Irish whiskey. Even that, his coffee-drinking habit was unrefined. He left his coffee and whiskey sit overnight in a paper cup on his desk. Then in the morning, he would just drink the cold, now filmy with cream concoction because he just liked it like that. I researched Ultralast, finding a similar make to what Ernie had cleverly bolted under his desk. I thought better than purchasing it online and instead opted for finding it somewhere in the city, and I did. In Morningside Heights, I paid cash, and with the metal safe comes a key. Then late one afternoon, soon before Ernie and Adeline usually left, I ran over to Ernie, who was standing by idly, these large barrels of coffee beans by the front door. "Oh my God, I'm such an idiot," I exclaimed. Ernie looked at me with a stupid grin. "What?" he said. I raised the palm of my hand to my forehead and I pounded it lightly. I stood closer to Ernie than usual. I reached my hand towards the big gang of keys that hung from his belt. "Can I just see those for a sec?" He dumbly detached them and he held them in his hand without handing them over. I grabbed them from his hand and I literally skipped out the door. Over my shoulder, I hollered, "I left my keys at home, I'm such a bonehead." Down the street was a hardware store. I popped in and I had them duplicate Ernie's store key, and then I plucked his sweet little Ultralast key out and I dropped it in my boot. I put my own new Ultralast key in its place, received the duplicate store key, and raced back to the store. I was smiling. I put the keys into Ernie's hand and then held up my own new store key. I'm such an idiot. Ernie shook his head. Adeline now stood by him. "Don't scold her," she advised. "I'll never do it again, I promise." The two were preparing to leave when I became so overjoyed at the thought of writing things that I actually embraced Adeline. She was leaving, and I whispered into her dry, gray-brown hair, "It's gonna be fine now." Ernie called at 10:30 p.m. that night. I read him the day's numbers, and I told him that the register was under by $120. "Oh," he said, "I paid John before I left today," and then we said goodnight. I hadn't planned on opening up that security box till after midnight. I was too nervous. I just sat at Ernie's filthy desk with my feet up on his coffee cups, knocking a half-full one over from that afternoon, staining more receipts. The smell of whiskey rose up. I stood to avoid the rushing stream of cold coffee. John walked into the basement then. He stood only halfway down the dark stairway and was acting shy. "Hey, John. I said you could get out of here. I'm just going to stay to clean up a little mess I made." But John didn't move. His white apron protruded in the middle, and I noticed how Little white was in his eyes. "What's up, John?" John had not been paid that day, not that month in fact. I told him I would talk to Ernie about it tomorrow, and I asked if he needed any money. He shook his head yes. I handed him $10, which was all I had in my wallet at the time. He smiled, and I walked back upstairs to let him out. Upstairs, I filled a new paper coffee cup half full from a plastic container in the fridge where we kept the iced coffee. I put in some cream. Then I brought the cup back downstairs and pulled a fifth of Irish whiskey from an unlocked desk drawer and counted 1, 2, 3 into the cup. Many receipts on Ernie's desk were damp, and I discovered a baby rat dying on a glue trap near a small puddle of coffee whiskey on the floor. It so repulsed me. I thought of John, and I felt frustrated. I thought of Adeline, and I felt sad. I thought of Ernie and Catherine, and I felt enraged. Then I thought of myself. Am I off to miss morning college classes, my failing grades, my loneliness? I picked up the glue trap with the small, still-moving rat, and I tossed it into a nearby wastebasket. I could hear them all around me. We kept the rat poison near the base of the stairs. I walked over to it, and I picked up the small plastic cup inside of it. It was a very fine powder. I carried the cup of poison over to the replacement paper cup full of coffee whiskey, and I added my own spice. Just a little something that wasn't part of the usual recipe. The Ultralast secure box, that safe, contained $23,220, and I took all of it. About 6:30 a.m. the next morning, I gave Ernie a call at home. I told him I didn't want to alarm him, but last night I found John rummaging around his desk. "What do you mean?" he asked. "Well, specifically, I found him under it. The whole day he had been acting strange too. Did you notice it? And at night, after I had found him under the desk, he wouldn't even make eye contact with me. I looked all around the desk and I didn't see anything unusual, just a little spilled coffee. I'm sorry to call so early, but I couldn't tell you last night. He stayed with me till I locked up, and well, I was a bit afraid." My shift would have started at 3 p.m. Ernie and Adeline arrived at the cafe a little before 8. The way Adeline tells it, she heard Ernie shouting and kicking in the basement. Then the police were called, and 3 officers came to await John's arrival, but he never came in. Then the vomiting started. Terrible projectile vomiting that did not let up. She thought that nerves had got him, but an ambulance was called, and it was found later that Ernie had ingested poison. Incidentally, I moved to Ireland. Dublin. I like it too. There's a nice cafe where I work, as a baker actually, and it turns out that I have a special talent for it.